I hope everybody can hear me all right. I sure welcome you all. I am Lorene Shyba. I'm publisher at Durvile and UpRoute books, and I'm also the series editor of the True Cases series. And for tonight, I will be your humble moderator as well. So after the force, June was so kind to hold it up. I'm going to, this is how much I've read it since I got it. After the force is book 8 in the True Cases series and edited by Detective Debbie J. Doyle, retired. And we're here to celebrate the launch. Woohoo! So it would have been so nice to all be together over a glass of wine over at Shelf Life Books. But at least this way, with Zoom, we have the chance to welcome people from elsewhere as well. I see that John Hill is here, for example. Wave, John. John is the author of the next True Cases book next year, which is called Pine Box Parole. It comes out next fall. Here's the lineup. Okay, this is what's going to happen tonight. I'm going to talk for just a couple of minutes, and then I'll introduce one at a time. Editor Debbie Doyle, then writers Gwyneth Allen, Trish Haley, you see her on screen as Trish Stone, Sherri Zickfoose. Where's Sherri? I haven't really seen, oh, there you are. Hey, Sherri. Sherri Zickfoose, Val Hoglund. Where's Val? Here's Val. Debbie McGreal-Dinning. And hopefully Dr. Thomas Dalby will also join us. We have a kind of a drop-in guest, which is just super. We hadn't talked to Ernie Lutet before the event to confirm his attendance, but he's here. So he's also a writer in the book, Ernie Lutet. I hope you've got a beverage with you, do you? I have both a tea and a brandy, so it depends how well it's going. Drink either brandy or tea, I guess. A snack? I was hoping to have chips, but I can't easily share them anyway. So if I eat too many chips, you know, too much salt. Thanks, June. Thanks, June Lee and everyone at Shelf Life Books for hosting not just this event, but our 4-book series of events for the fall 2021 books. So he's added a link in the chat to hotshot a signed copy of the book direct to your door. If you're so inclined. I hope you buy a book. Thank you also to our supporters at Canadian Heritage Canada Book Fund and the Alberta Media Fund. As far as timing goes, I expect we'll be here for at least an hour, maybe an hour and a half. Let's see how you'll be used to hearing me say, I learned something from every book I publish. Adds to my heart. It's not trivial. Every book changes my life. And After the Force is no exception at all. No exception at all. Boy, oh boy. The writer's guides for the True Cases books all along has been, tell us about the cases, and in this case, the investigations that were disquieting, perplexing, had weird or surprising twists or turns, stuff that keeps you up at night. And boy, these After the Force writers dug deep, you'll see. We also wanted to know how these cases or investigations informed these writers' choices of a career or way of life after they retired from the police service. So that's where this book is unique. So I would say a really great example of this is Dave Wilton's chapter. Dave was one of the first writers to step forward to editor Debbie Doyle, expressing an interest in writing for the book. The contrast of his searing anxiety in the process of apprehending a child serial killer in Saskatoon contrasts dramatically with the pleasure he derived from his retirement career after the force. That's what this book is all about. I'd like to read an excerpt from Dave's story. First, an example of the investigation that kept him up at night. So here it is, an example of his heart, if I must say. So it's midsummer, it's 1970 in Saskatchewan. He says, by this time, the city of Saskatoon was on the verge of panic. I could feel it. There were 4 children missing. I could only imagine the agony the parents were going through. Frustration reigned, and the people were reluctant to let children out of sight. I was worried too, as I was a relatively new father, having a 4-year-old son and a 6-year-old daughter at home. There were times I wished I was at home with them rather than being out all hours looking for 4 missing children. But I had a duty to fulfill, and we wanted desperately to locate those children. So there's a few questions that go through his mind. There are 4 children missing, presumed to have been abducted and killed by an unknown person. Could we solve this mystery, he asks? Would we be removed and assigned to other cases? Is it possible we may never see a conclusion to this case, be it good or bad? Often this is what happened. This uncertainty is a common thread among police work. We often just don't know it. So this serial killer was apprehended. He was charged and he spent a lot of time in prison. Dave Wilton calls his apprehension a highlight of his career. So Dave retired. He retired in 1997. And he started doing what? He started painting houses. Became a painter. He says, I find painting therapeutic. Anytime something is painted, it appears new. The smell of fresh paint conjures images of spring and summer and new beginnings. The old and tattered look is shaken off, and sad becomes happy again. For the painter, he or she can look at the work, see the end result, and be proud of a job well done, or lament over one done poorly. It's similar to police work in many ways, with one notable exception. In police work, most officers never get to see the result of their efforts. With painting, this retired officer finally has had the satisfaction of enjoying the end result of a job well done. I'd like to now introduce Debbie Doyle. Debbie J. Doyle is a retired veteran of the Edmonton Police Service. During her career, she was seconded to the United Nations Peacekeeping Force in Timor-Leste, East Timor, and after serving 2 tours, she returned to Edmonton and worked in the Child Protection Section and the Internet Child Pornography Section. Debbie and her husband, Dan, who's here tonight, enjoy horseback riding, scuba diving, gardening, and hunting. She currently writes novels and enjoys telling stories around campfires, sitting on her excellent, may I say, homemade crabapple liqueur. Debbie?
Hi, everybody. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. And first off, what I would like to say is that during the process of compiling this book, I was able to meet so many individuals, retired police officers, and it was wonderful to get to meet and know everybody. There were emails and numerous phone calls, and during the phone calls, a lot of the time there was a lot of serious stuff that we talked about, but there was a lot of humor too, and jokes and stories arose. I remember one such phone call. I was talking to Dave Wilton, and I remember the phone call. It was quite a lengthy phone call, and Dave and I started BSing. And we were talking about all sorts of different things. And he talked about his move from Saskatchewan to Calgary. And he spoke about his wife, Ray. And when he spoke about his wife, Ray, I could hear the love in his voice. He didn't have to say it, but I could hear it. Unfortunately, in September, just a couple months ago, Dave passed away. And he was never able to see the completion of the book. But tonight, what we have is we have his lovely wife, Ray, and I saw her, there she is on the screen. His son, Rob, his daughter, Nicole, and I believe, I'm not sure who that is, a grandchild. And what I would like to do is I would like to thank you all for your husband, father, and grandfather, Dave Wilton. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody, for the respect that you're giving to Dave Wilton. It would have been nice to have him here tonight. So Debbie, are you ready for a question or two about your work?
I sure am.
Okay, that's great. Well, it's a fun story. I know it's going to be a fun story because Debbie's going to tell us about how the book came about and what criteria attracted you to these particular contributors and their particular stories.
Well, the book came about actually through a gentleman named Richard Van Camp. Now, Richard was the writer in residence at Strathcona County Library. And I had written my manuscript. It was police fiction. And I gave it to Richard. And he read through it. And after he read through it, he contacted you, Lorene. And he introduced Lorene and I through emails. And then Lorene and I spoke through phone calls. And eventually we met. And of course, Lorene publishes nonfiction, whereas my book was fiction. So what Lorene did is she said, you know what? I have an idea for a book. So she proposed the idea of After the Force. And I thought about it and I thought, you know what? This is an amazing book. This book has a lot of potential. So what I did is I started contacting police services from across the country. And I'm sure my husband thought I was crazy, but I think the phone was connected to my ear and the computer was connected to my hands. And it was amazing, the response. I asked for stories, and with the solicitation of those stories, they started rolling in from retired police officers. And I read over the stories, and then I emailed and called the authors and spoke with the authors on the phone. And there are many here tonight. And I found that in their voices, I heard passion, the same passion that I saw in their writing. So I thought these are the perfect stories to provide or to compile in this book, provide the reader the true idea and concept of what police work is really about.
Well, I'd like to show everybody the map that we created in the book. I guess you probably recognize this country here. And we have authors and stories from all across the country, all the way from Newfoundland, with a story about the Newfoundland mafia, or just a riot of a story. And then quite a number of people from Ontario, from Ottawa, stories from Ottawa, like Trish Haley's story she's going to talk about in a minute, and from Hamilton area. Debbie McGreal-Dinning is from there, and from Toronto, of course, and Burlington. And then across the country here, a couple of stories from Saskatchewan, lots of stories from Alberta. This is really our book. The nucleus of this book comes right here from our province. And then poor little BC, that is, poor little Vancouver, that's really cut off right now. Isn't that sad? Actually, my son who designed the cover is trying to get back into Vancouver right now. It's not an easy task. But Debbie, I'm going to ask you another question. And I think this one has a lot of energy to it and a lot of emotion. So take a deep breath. You say at the onset of the book that police have recently come under fire for unprofessional or unethical policing methods. So how does this collection of ours dispel that notion?
Well, the book has nothing to do with unethical or unprofessional police methods. What the book has to do with is the true form of policing. And that is the human side of policing. Policing is not what most people see on TV or in the movies or even in the media. When the reader opens the book and starts reading, Each chapter is written by a unique police officer in a different part of the country, experiencing a situation, an investigation, a case. And while the reader is reading the book, they are right beside that officer. They see what the officer sees. They hear what the officer hears. They feel what the officer hears at that moment. And I think that's important because that reader will travel with the officer along the whole spectrum of that case. And as the reader is reading that chapter, they're going to get a little bit of collateral trauma from reading that story, because this isn't fluff. Every single author is a real person, and these are raw words from their mouths. And I think what is important is that as each story is read, the reader will gain a better understanding that police work isn't driving fast or necessarily arresting bad guys. Police work is all about humanity. And as the reader journeys through the entire book and weaves in and out of these stories, by the end of the book, that reader will realize that all of the officers retired at one point in time, and that they are continuing to live valuable lives after the force, and their resiliency, even though they have baggage and trauma, their resiliency continues. And I think what's also important is that they help people when they were police officers in the uniform. But after the force, with no uniform, they continue to help police officers because those are the types of humans they are. They want to help society.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, thanks so much, Debbie. We'll hear from you again at the end, because as the answers to these questions come along, you might have some new thoughts that you can help us summarize. I'd like to now introduce Gwyneth Allen. Here's Gwyneth there. Put your hand up so that we know who to expect. Gwyneth Allen, she's I guess the second Calgarian in the batch, you know, myself being the first. We have Gwyn from Calgary, we have Tom Dalby and Sherri Zickfoose. So these are sort of our homies. Next week, we're doing an event through Audrey's in Edmonton with the Edmonton, specifically with the Edmonton writers. And so, you know, that'll be the Edmonton crowd. If they can, Bob's, what are those called? Bobcat their way out of all the snow. We got a lot of snow. I'd like to introduce now Gwyneth Allen. She was a police officer for 30 years. Last assigned to a threat assessment team for a criminal intelligence unit with the Calgary Police Service. Gwyneth was designated as the subject matter specialist in domestic violence, criminal harassment, and stalking. Since her 2019 semi-retirement, Gwyneth has been working as a civilian member of the Tsuut'ina First Nation Police Service and enjoying every moment as it comes. So are you ready for your question, Gwyn?
Go ahead. I was going to say shoot, but you know.
Oh, go ahead and shoot me. Isn't that the name of the book? Her story is called Leon, Darlene, Tamara, and Naomi Through the Lens. So question for you. In your story, you tell of working with 4 women who dealt with spousal abuse. Leon, Darlene, Tamara, and Naomi. Can you summarize one of their stories and read a paragraph or two?
It's actually really hard to do because it's they're all so much a part of my heart, and writing about this. Thank you, by the way, for asking me to do this. And when I got the call from Debbie, she's right. We had quite the conversations, and we went down some very funny and some very heartening trails. I'm going to, because the chapter talks about these amazing women who basically shaped who I am today, and who I have just infinite appreciation for. I want to take the opportunity before I read you a little bit to acknowledge all the shoulders on which I stand. There are so many people, the authors of this book included, whose shoulders on which I stand. And as I'm looking at some, I can't see all of the people that have joined in the chat area. However, I see some names, you know, my former partner, Debbie Melnick, who I write about in the book. Dorian Van Horn, amazing, from NCIS, just the coolest chick in the world. Ardella, Peggy, Dr. Alana Cook, who I also mention in the chapter. I stand on some amazing shoulders, and I could go on and on telling you their names and stories about how much I appreciate them. When Debbie called and asked, I was very intrigued by the question itself. I said, or she had said to me, tell us about, can you tell us about the situations which have influenced what you're doing in retirement? And I thought, that is such a good question. And so I took on the challenge, and here I sit. So in my chapter, I do have an introduction. I tell you a little bit about my career. And then the very first person I talk about is Leon. And this is just a very short little bit, and I'm just going to read it for you. Things shifted for me in the spring of 2000. My home phone rang. It was my mom calling to tell me that my cousin's 27-year-old daughter, Leon, had been murdered by her intimate partner. A few weeks later, I was sitting in a domestic violence training session as the trainers played a 911 audio recording of a child calling for help because his mother had been killed. My knees buckled, and I left the room in tears. Leon's 3 children were in the home when she was murdered. Looking back, I truly believe it was in that moment that I knew that I needed to dedicate my life to ensuring that this didn't happen to anyone else, or doing my level best to try and do that. I go on to talk about Darlene, somebody who, when you read the book, you will see the depth, the trauma, and yet how much I learned from her. And I'm just going to tell you quickly, I know we want to get everybody in, but I want to tell you a little bit about Darlene. But before I tell you that, Leon's dad, my cousin Russell, passed away this summer from cancer. And after Leon was murdered, his wife Sharon and he, and with her brother Brad, they raised her children. And they are amazing young adults who were surrounded by love, and they were safe. So I have nothing but admiration for them, and I'm glad that they call them family. So the one thing about Darlene, and I know that my former investigative partner, Deb, will know exactly what I'm talking about. We took Darlene, who was the victim of just absolutely incredible trauma at the hands of a number of intimate partners. We took her, I can't tell you how many times, to the hospital because she was suicidal, she had substance issues, she had all sorts of things going on. And one time, and I remember Deb and I were in the car, and I just, in my ignorance, I said to her, Darlene, why don't you just, have you ever thought about finding a nice guy to, be in a relationship? And she looked at me and she said, I've tried, but I get bored. And, as I say in the book, at first blush, you might think, oh, she's being very flippant. But really what she was telling me was her normal was to be in chaos, because that's what her life was. She only felt normal, her normal, when she was in chaos.
Right.
So what she taught me was that it's not about what I want for her, for someone, or what I think would help them, but we have to meet them where they're at. And so she taught me that.
Isn't that something?
Tamara,
Yeah.
Naomi, Cole, these are the people I write about in the book, and I love each and every one of them, and I appreciate their willingness to be vulnerable yet again. And let me tell this.
Well, thank you so much, Gwyn. There are four just amazing stories of women who have dealt with spousal violence, and I sure thank you very much for the work that you've done. I'd like to now introduce Trish Haley. Trish is a retired Ottawa police officer, and she has now four children, 6 grandchildren, and in retirement, her passion for police work has been replaced with a passion for painting, much as Dave Wilton had, only she paints beautiful, beautiful artwork. I've seen it, and I think that it's worth collecting. Trish, I've got a question for you. Are you ready for your question?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So Trish, in your story, you took a unique perspective by framing it as a letter to your great-granddaughter, Angela, great-great-granddaughter, a hypothetical great-great-granddaughter, Angela. You give Angela some really great advice by sharing, as you write, a call that changed my life forever. So could you tell us why you chose to introduce your call as a letter to your great-great-great-granddaughter?
Sure. First off, I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity to turn a lot of negative experiences into positive ones. So thank you. I'll keep this brief and I'll refer to my notes because I have difficulty speaking. I will try my best to answer the question. However, speaking is a challenge, so your audience might have to listen carefully. Firstly, the idea of a letter was written at the last minute. I'd been having a conversation with my grandson, Aiden, about the state of the world, past, present, and future. I asked Aiden how we could pass on our experience to future generations. I began thinking of my grandfather from Dublin, his struggles and his story, how he immigrated to Canada with only clothes on his back and 56 cents in his pocket, hungry for food and work, and met with protests of Irish go home. He never gave up. Aiden thought of his friend John, a World War II veteran. A close relationship, respect, and interest grew. Knowledge of John's history grew. John had a story. Everyone has a story. That's why I thought a letter to a future grandchild would keep my story alive. Words are powerful. They teach the younger generation about the strength of their voice and impact on society, laws, and politics. Most importantly, my letter and story bring attention to the senseless murder of a young police officer, Constable David Kirkwood, how his family dealt with the tragedy, how other officers still have to deal with the cop killer today. My letter, my chapter, my story ensure people don't forget. Like Aiden says, we can better prepare for our future by looking at our past and through reading great books like After the Force.
Oh, that's terrific, Trish. Thanks so much for sharing your reasons for writing the letter to your great-great-great-granddaughter. It's a really amazing story. It's incredible what she went through, what Trish went through. And I think once you read it in the book, you'll agree. So I'd like now to introduce Sherri Zickfoose. Sherri wrote the foreword to After the Force. And when I see her face on screen here, I'll know she's with us. Maybe she's off there pouring herself a cup of tea or a glass of brandy. Sherri, are you here? I am here. Okay. So Sherri, well, I'll introduce you, and I'm still not seeing you, but can you hear me? Someone has to unmute me. Oh, maybe you didn't. We didn't realize, or June didn't realize, that you were part of the cast, so to speak.
Okay, that should be fixed now. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you, June. Sorry, guys. I was having some connectivity issues, so I had to pop back out, but here I am.
Oh,
Thanks.
I see. Okay. Well, Sherri, here you are. You're a former crime reporter for the Calgary Herald. I sure remember seeing your byline lots of times. And true crime co-author of the best-selling nonfiction book, Runaway Devil, How Forbidden Love Drove a 12-year-old to Murder Her Family. And I hope that you received your copy of the book. Did you get the book?
It hasn't arrived yet, but I did have the
Oh.
benefit of reading some early drafts, so I'm quite
Okay.
excited to talk about it.
Well, I'll ask this question, and if it's tough to answer because you haven't actually, seen the hard copy of the book, I'll ask you a different question. I'll make something else up. Okay, so as a crime reporter, you covered every corner, as you describe it in your foreword: an armed standoff, a fatal house fire, a riverbank where a rape victim was left for dead, a gang shooting, and knocking on a door to ask a grieving mother or father questions about their dead child. This kind of lens, as you say, changes the way you look at your city and your community. Can you see this reflected in the stories in this book?
Absolutely, I can. So, of course, my experience is much different than the authors of this book. As a journalist, of course, I was definitely in the thick of things, interviewing villains and victims and being in crisis. But the experience, of course, is very different because I was never really in that kind of danger. But I will tell you that my experience was very much on the front lines. And what I'm most excited about from reading some of these stories in their earliest drafts is knowing how that whole writing and editing process is so cathartic and so infuriating. It becomes kind of magical in a sense, and I think you can all, authors are probably nodding in agreement. It's not so easy to put those experiences you've had into words. It's very tough. You've got a lot going on. They're not happy memories. There's a lot of trauma and despair and injustice, and it's not easy to put into words. So my hats are off to all of you. Debbie and Lorene especially, conceiving the idea of this book and then convincing people to open themselves up, because once you write it and get it out there, it's forever, and that's a very tough process to go through. It's because you've got this responsibility. You want to really articulate it and get it right, and history and our emotions really play with our memories, I think. You got a lot working against you. So I can only imagine this process has been just excruciating, and hopefully in the best of ways for everybody to work through those experiences and to be able to share them. Because don't we all owe you so much? This After the Force really shines that light on how deep these old cases go, how ingrained that trauma is. Again, I mentioned the injustices because that's what always burns in my brain. Maybe you're different. But to not give up and to not kind of have that feeling of hopelessness. So I really appreciate that you folks have taken the time to put your experience into those words and to share yourselves with the rest of us, because really that experience is just invaluable, and I just can't thank you enough. having to put into words when we know most of the time there really are no words for that. It's a big deal. So thank you, everybody.
Well, thanks, Sherri, for getting involved as a forward writer. It really set a wonderful atmosphere for the book, and I'm glad you waited and didn't contribute your forward until you'd read quite a few of the drafts, because it's reflected well in what you've written. So thank you ever so much. I'd like to now introduce Val Hoglund. Val, are you there? There you are, yes.
Hi.
Val is still on the job. Val's kind of like, you know, the outlier of this bunch. There's a lot of retired cops around here, and Val is still on the job. You know, she's a senior constable with the Edmonton Police Service. She studied phys ed at the University of Alberta and general studies at Ryerson University in Ontario. She's a certified restorative justice facilitator and also an equine assisted personal development coach. She's concentrated her 30-year career on helping children, youth, and families. The highlight of her career was when she was in youth unit and partnered with who, Val?
Right there.
Is Hershey there? Oh,
There he is.
Great. See, if we'd been at Shelf Life Books, Hershey would probably not be with us, but that's the star of her show. That's Hershey the dog. Val was the recipient of a provincial team award for her work in the youth unit. So Val, as the only officer in the book who's still on the job, everyone else is already living the retirement dream. So what do you plan to do with your time once you retire?
Well, thanks, Lorene, for that wonderful introduction. I am so happy to be here, and I am so grateful for everyone who's joined in on the call, whether you're on video or not on video. Yes, I am still serving member. I don't have the luxury of sleeping in every day. And I think I was very, very lucky to be considered for the book. Thank you, Lorene. Thank you, Debbie. And it is nice to have me right at the end of the book, the last chapter, to still give that context of the policing. And even though I have 31 years on, how important it is still for me to be able to contribute to that, knowing that retirement is very soon and looming. And to answer your question is, I think writing. And, you know, Lorene called me when I had all these noisy, stinky policemen around me. I kicked them all out of the office and shut the door, and I got an important phone call to take. This is a publisher. And, you know, Lorene, I absolutely couldn't wait to work with you and Debbie and to get this story out, because like Debbie said, we are police officers in this uniform that everybody sees as the same, but we do offer human-centered police work, and it's absolutely my honor to still be able to do that, knowing that I do want to go into a career in writing, and I have a book on the go as well, more about the therapy dog that I did work with in youth unit. And if you guys like, I'll read you a short little paragraph of my chapter. I will never forget the first day I met Amber in 2015. Amber is not her real name, but that's who the story is about. I was in youth unit and I had an office in Amber's junior high school. Her tragic story is almost identical to many wonderful Indigenous children, and sadly includes many hardships. Amber was 14 years old and in grade 9 when our paths crossed. This beautiful Indigenous girl had been up all night and came to school while high on drugs. She was wearing cannabis printed leggings. I looked down at my therapy dog, Hershey, who I'd been working with for about a year then, and I said to him, boy, do we have our work cut out for us. And then it just goes on to tell more of Amber's story. And you know, it's funny that Sherri, I believe Sherri had mentioned how when she looked at all our stories, it is so true that it's an absolute honor to write someone else's story down and the biggest headache ever, because you know you want it to be well written, and you're the one telling the story, and the person, like, Amber and I spent many nights in the van with the van running. It was winter, and writing and editing and writing and editing, and I am so glad we have that memory together. So thank you, Lorene. Thank you to anyone who buys the book.
Yeah, I think you'll like Val's story. She talks about Hershey doing a trick. You know, I have dogs and I like to train them to do tricks, but Hershey did a trick. It's called hide from the cops, right? Hide from the cops, and Hershey would lie there and put his hands over his eyes. So I'm trying to teach my dogs the hide from the cop. Thanks a lot, Val. That's great. We look forward to seeing the work that you do with your book about Hershey.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to drop Ernie Lutet into the program here. Ernie, are you with us? Unmute yourself if you're, oh, there you are. Okay. Great, Ernie. I know Ernie wanted to say a word or two about his colleague, Dave Wilton.
Absolutely. Dave Wilton was my inspector in the early 90s. I was kind of a rebel. I always was pushing against policy and stuff, like trying to figure ways to creatively solve what I thought were problems. And Dave had the unfortunate position of being my boss at the time. And he was the inspector, and we used to call him Smiling Dave because he was always smiling. And I just got to tell a story, and Ray, I love you. I haven't seen you for years, but anyhow, my wife asked me, she said, if something happens to you on the job, how will I know? I said, well, a white shirt will come, because the inspectors used to wear white shirts back then, and they'll come to our house. And not thinking, Dave just wanted to meet my wife and our son, who was just born. So that he was the type of leader that wanted to know who his men's families are, who the people that work for him, their families. So he took it upon himself, because he had no meetings, to drive to my house in a patrol car and get out with the white shirt. To my wife's absolute terror, when the doorbell rang, seeing a white shirt there, thinking something had happened to me. And then when she opened the door, Dave realized what happened, and he goes, "Oh no! I just wanted to meet you. I just wanted to see our son and stuff like that." It was one of those things about Dave that he that just kind of nailed it. He just loved his guys. Even if and I was, like I said, I was a difficult employee. I was always getting into mischief and stuff like that, and he was always there to support you. Big, smiling, kind man. And when he retired, I saw him afterwards at McDonald's. He was having coffee with some other retired policemen and stuff like that. And he said he wanted to write, and I encouraged him. I said, just write, just write it. I mean, see what happens. If nobody reads it, at least you have it for your children and for your grandchildren. So I'm so happy that he has a story in his book. I was in Northern Ontario visiting my family in September, and when I came back, that's when I found out David passed. And when I told my wife, it was total sadness, because he was a good man, and I miss him. And Ray, I know you're here tonight, and God bless you for taking care of that man, and him taking care of us. So.
Oh, well, thanks, Ernie. That's a lovely tribute. And Ernie's story in the book is called "There's No Law Against It, Constable," and it's about sniffers in 1989 in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. And you know what? It's a really complex story, and I just can't really imagine summarizing it easily, Ernie. So I think I'm just going to suggest to people to take their time and read the story and appreciate the work that Ernie did against all odds, putting a bad guy away, right?
That's a good way of putting it. It was, a lot of police officers, we look for the big, well, not all of us, but a lot of police officers look for the big case, and not realizing that sometimes the big case is right in front of your eyes, and it could be, it's a big case to the community that you serve. And it may not be a big case to anybody else. So Gwen, I love what you were saying about domestic violence. I understand that so well from being in patrol for my whole career. Don't look for the big cases. They'll come to you when they get there.
Yes.
But solve the ones that need to be solved in your community, and do it as creatively as you can, and stay within the law, of course. But yeah, I encourage you to read the story. It was very pivotal for me. It changed the way I policed, and stayed with me my whole career.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Ernie. Elizabeth Cordeiro was scheduled to read tonight, but she has a very bad cold, and so she has declined. Her story was about a partner who was overcome by PTSD, and it's a very common theme in this book, post-traumatic stress disorder, about the triggers and how it affected her quite strongly because of her care and her dedication to her partner. And I would like to now introduce Debbie McGreal-Dinning, who has a very interesting approach to working with PTSD. She's a former police officer with the Hamilton Police Service in Ontario. Following her time as a frontline patrol officer, she was seconded to Crime Stoppers, the Media Relations Office, and Domestic Bail Safety Unit, where she was promoted to sergeant. She also worked as a detective in the Criminal Investigation Division before leaving in 2016. So her journey, her sojourn, as Gwyn would put it, her sojourn has taken her out of law enforcement and into a healing space, where she now supports women working in emergency services, providing backup in a different way. So Deb continues to reside in her hometown of Hamilton with her husband and 2 children. So Debbie, I will ask you this question. A few years ago, you left policing and you have a practice in Hamilton called Blue Heart Healing, where, as you say, it is your great honor and focus to now hold a lantern to create a space to help police officers see through the fog and shine a light on a way forward. Can you explain some of your techniques for healing?
Yeah, thanks, Lorene. Thanks, everyone, for being on the call tonight and all of our guests. I've read the book, and I mean, I think Gwyn was saying in some of the emails, I honestly feel so honored to be part of the other contributors, and the stories are so heartfelt, and also to be part of the police family. And I know if you are part of that in any way, shape, or form, it is quite unique. So a little bit to add to that, I was with Hamilton Police for 16 years, but I think it's different for so many of our stories, because even though I served for 16 years, and I know Val's still there, and for 31 years, I grew up in policing with my father as a Hamilton police officer as well, as superintendent before he left. And so I write about that in my story briefly. One of my earliest memories is even just the smell of the old 1970s or maybe late 1960s, if there's any officers on here from there, the long winter coat and just the smells of the city. I remember tangibly those smells from the time I was very young. So I ended up following in his footsteps and became a police officer in 2001. And many people ask, like, I left, it's hard to believe, actually it'll be 7 years this coming February that I've been gone. And in my bio there that Lorene just read, everything on paper was great. I just got promoted to sergeant, and that's what, everybody wants. And I did too, and I was super appreciative of it, and I had a great career. So when people ask, like, why did you leave? I can't actually pinpoint, but I do think about some of the things that probably were lurking in the background without me even seeing it, or that I was not really open to seeing. So after 6 years of being gone now, about 3 years ago, I went back and I got certified in what's called Neuro-Linguistic Programming. And if anyone's heard of that, it's trauma focused. I know there's a doctor here on the call. And really, it's just about communication and how we store our memories and our thoughts and how our brain processes those things. And I do that hand in hand with hypnotherapy, and I do that with ecotherapy. So bringing in all of our world and knowing that, or having police officers understand that they're not alone in this, and that it's just coming back to finding themselves behind that badge, and that there is healing and there's resiliency there, and there's tools already there within us to be able to heal. So it's my honor and my dedication now to work with particularly women in in law enforcement and other emergency services, because there is a completely unique experience that I've also lived in working there for so many years. And so if anyone is, looking for that kind of thing, or wants to take a look at the website, it is called Blue Heart Healing. And it's a really soft and quiet stillness that I think a lot of us have to go into in order to really find those tools that we have inside of us and that resiliency to move forward and really figure out what happens with where we store our trauma and how we navigate our lives moving forward. So when you do retire, or you do go on to that next chapter, we want to do that in a really, really healthy way if we can, and recognize what we've experienced, and every story is so different. Like I've heard so many, from domestics to homicides. It could be even just over the years, these really unassuming calls that we go to, right? It's all of these little triggers over the years and that mind mapping that we realize that it does affect you at the core, and it does change who you are sometimes. And so beyond that badge is really what the program is called. And I'm honored to work with police officers moving forward.
Great. Debbie, do you mind if I crash your talk for a minute?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because, you've been very generous answering my question. But I look at your story and there's some paragraphs here that are my favorite.
Okay.
And the chapter that she wrote is called The House with the Little Green Door. And she talks about the, innumerable cases of, children being in homes without any care. And it really, affected me that there's those kind of, and just so many in a night. Like sometimes you'd answer multiple calls of children who needed help, right? And she had a partner, and they went to knock on a little green door after somebody informed that there were some children that needed attention. And this is her and her partner, okay? We move into position to knock on the little green door. I feel the frigid winter air seeping through my boots as I wiggle my toes around to ward off the cold. Standing on either side of the door frame, making sure not to stand directly in front of the door itself, I reach out and knock 3 times. Again, our bodies, like mirror images of each other, lean in to take another listen. Without having to say anything, I know Jeff too has heard what I've heard. We hold our breath for a moment and take a closer listen to what appears to be the soft, sweet, and scared voices of little girls. I can hear one of them shush the others, instructing them to go watch TV. And I challenge any one of you to read this story and not just feel like your heart's going to jump right out of your chest. It's a beautiful story. And I thank you all for your stories. But Debbie, that was very humble of you to talk about your healing, not talk about your story, but I just felt like we had to hear a little something about it.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thanks a lot. I'm going to introduce Tom Dalby now. This is Dr. J. Thomas Dalby. And honestly, Tom, you're one of my very favorite people in the world, and you're so smart. And no matter what kind of challenge I put you up to, you always have such a terrific summary. So, we couldn't have asked a better person in the whole world to write an afterword to After the Force, because he has a lot of experience in forensic units at hospitals and working with police officers over the years. He's a psychologist who's been in practice for 43 years now, specializes in forensic psychology and neuropsychology. He held appointments with the faculties of social science and medicine at the University of Calgary for 33 years and remains affiliated with Athabasca University and has been since 1977. He's the author of, okay, hold your breath here, people, 120 articles and books in law, psychology, and medicine, and quite a few with Durvile publications. So Tom, I'm so happy to see you here. In your afterword to the book, you talk about the stressors that police face from all sides: occupational stress, organizational stress, criminal justice stressors, and public stressors. I am very interested presently in the issues of public stress, but I'll leave it up to you to elaborate on any or all of these types of stressors you have treated amongst members of the police community.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and greetings from Arizona, where I'm wearing shorts and no socks. So, and I hadn't worn socks for a month. So, I began working with police officers in 1981 when I began doing forensic work and appearing in courts. And guess who's sitting beside me on the bench, ready to go give testimony? Is a police officer. So we're just over the time. I've got to know so many of them. There was no psychologist offering services to police at that time in Calgary. So I got a call, would you like to do some of that? Well, I have a little extra time. So over the year, I saw many police officers in that. Even though I was giving testimony for the defense witness, now I'm gonna go and we're gonna work on issues that you might have. So over the years, I've selected officers for international service and developed all sorts of investigative programs, trying to crack the case with some of the things. So my experience with police officers is deep, so I think that I'm an outsider, but a little bit of an insider too. And so many officers do carry the weight of what they've done. Their service causes them, obviously, significant trauma. And people, in the last 10 years, the idea of post-traumatic stress has changed dramatically. It used to be, well, a bad thing has happened to you, in 3 or 4 months, everything's going to be gone. Post-traumatic stress disorder is now thought of as a chronic disorder. And so you approach it that way, and that you're going to have to struggle with this for a while. It doesn't have to ruin your life, but have that mindset. So what are the stressors that these officers face? Well, the obvious one is parts of the job. You're carrying a gun. You might have to use significant force, and significant force might be used against you. But that doesn't happen that often. Just the threat of it is a stressor. But there's many others. There's no officer sitting there who has a regular job. Get up at 9 to 4, 9 to 4, irregular hours, which interferes with their family life every single day. So those are the things those seem obvious. But then they're working with an organization, and all police forces are paramilitary organizations with that kind of structure. The opportunities for advancement are often very limited. And, you know, that really does stifle a lot of ambitious officers. Then, of course, there is the criminal justice stressors. When I go to courts and I've spent a day on the stand, and then I look in the newspaper and there's a 1-inch column, they haven't captured what went on in that trial, and you know they can't. And of course, journalists may say we try our best, and they do, but often there's a very distorted idea of what went on in that trial. And so that upsets officers as well. And of course, in the criminal justice stressors, they spend 6 months on a trial to have it kicked out at the last minute for a technicality. And again, there's another stressor. But the biggest one that many of them tell me about is the public stressors. What does the general public think about police officers? And this has been, you know, a controversy in the last couple of years. Defund the police officers is absurd, because we must have police officers, and Canada has some of the best police officers in the world. When I was selecting Canadian police officers to go on international service, they would often lead those teams because they were considered by other nations, police officers, to be the very best. So they often led them. So that is what they're up against. And what are the police supposed to do? At times, the thought of they can solve all the problems. No, because our other institutions in our society, the social services, drop the ball so often that it looks bad for the police. And so they often carry this stigma that you haven't solved the problems. Well, it's not their job. You know, and police officers are often said, well, I'm part psychologist, social worker, you know, economist, but it's too much sometimes to handle. And so that public stressor, I think, is the one that has increased in the last few years. And one what bothers me understanding what they have to deal with. So.
Right. Oh, well, thanks a lot, Tom. That was very, very enlightening. And I'm going to just thank you so much, everybody. And I'd like to swing it back to Debbie, actually, because Debbie didn't have a chance to read from her story at the beginning because, you know, I wasn't sure how much time we were going to have. But I've got this long line of just adorable comments in chat, but I don't have any tough questions for anybody. You know, I've got just stay there on standby for a second, Debbie, because let me go through some of these wonderful comments. You know, Dorian Van Horn says to everybody, just proud to call you friend. Lynn Henning says to Gwyn, you're amazing, Gwyn. Great to see you, Trish, says Paul Gallant. Proud of you, Gwyn. Thanks for helping my son and I and all the others. You're an angel on earth, you're called, Gwyn. Angel on earth. And somebody said, Paul Gallant said to Trish, that was great, Trish, well done. And somebody else said, somebody has to unmute me. Oh, that was to Sherri when she didn't have her microphone on. Big thank you to Debbie for such kind words about my dad. This is from Nicole Wilton. We're so proud. He was very much looking forward to seeing the final product. Debbie Doyle says to everybody, it's an honor to have met him over the phone. Absolute pleasure to visit with Ray. This is feeling very chummy. My adorable Val, Hazel says, congrats. I admire your courage. Now, I don't know whether this is courage with Amber or courage with Hershey or courage with me. Courage with them. But, you know, good on you. Debbie MD, you're a gift, says not Jenny. Thank you for sharing. Dorian Van Horn says, you're all inspirational. Thank you for your service. Thank you for all the contributors and for sharing tonight. I'm so excited to read the book. That was from Nicole Wilton. Twyla Graham, proud of you, Val, for stretching your wings. So there you go, stretching wings. Looking forward to reading your work. And Sherri Zickfoose says to Deb, how difficult was it? Oh, it's a question from the reporter. Right on. Okay, well, Deb, since it's your turn, you know, I see Mark Denis here as well. So I would be very interested in hearing your comment about Trish Haley's story. But let's swing it to Deb for a minute here. Oh, Elizabeth Thomas says to Gwyn, you're not just my hero, you're not just my friend, you're my hero. So Larry Hill said, during this Zoom, I've ordered the book from my local Indigo store. Oh, I wonder how Shelf Life's going to feel about that. Okay, well, Larry, you know, either from Shelf Life or from Indigo, that would be fine. So where's Sherri's question here? Let me just find Sherri's question. Okay, Deb, how difficult was it to persuade the contributing officers to write about their experiences?
Actually, what was quite interesting is that I said to the officers that this book is being written, and what I would like you to do is write a chapter, but I'm going to be writing a chapter. I want to have all these officers write a chapter, but we're not getting paid for this. What we're doing, once again, is another public service. So are you willing to share something very deep and personable? And once it's out there, it's out there. Share about your PTSD, share about your triumphs and your failures. Are you willing to do that? And if you are, I would love for you to write. And actually it was quite easy because every single person, I see Mark Denis here, and I think further in the next page, Jackie Gordon is here as well, I believe. And all of the officers, once again, everyone I talked to were more than happy to do something, not for themselves, but for society. And I would rather not read a portion of my book. I would rather listen to what Mark has to say in response to Trish.
All right, Mark, you're up. Well, while he's unmuting, let me just say that Trish Haley's story, as she mentioned, was about a terrible situation she had with just a, you know, sort of this a misogynistic psychopath that tried to get into her police car, and she was very close to shooting the guy, right, Trish? Is that what happened? Finger on the trigger. And Mark Denis is also very much aware of this story.
I'm sorry, Lorene, I'm not familiar with that story.
An interesting.
I think I'm unmuted now.
Yes.
I do remember that incident quite well, actually. I think I just wrote a post script to Trish's story, a footnote, if you will. So I don't have a chapter in the book. I didn't really want to say too much. But I remember distinctly the incident. It was, she dealt with a suspect who had previously killed a police officer. In 1977, David Kirk was a police officer at the Ottawa Police, and he was murdered by Fred Coffey. His death inspired the initiation of the memorial, the federal memorial every year on the Hill, on Parliament Hill. He spent 10 years in an asylum and was released back into the community in which we worked. I had dealt with him after he was released. I was a young officer on the road with just 2 or 3 years. But I dealt with him with a partner who was a great big guy. I was fairly big. And he didn't seem to be as intimidating as I had been led to believe by listening to the stories. Trish dealt with him as a very new officer. And I think being a woman made him feel much braver and much more confident in himself. And he was very intimidating. We rolled to the scene, as we all do. It was resolved. But I think what I took away from that, but not until many, many years later, was a different impact that calls have on individuals. To us, when we arrived, he became very meek. So we felt good about ourselves. We had done the right thing. Trish's takeaway, I believe, was a bit different. Being young, being new, and Trish is a sweetheart. She worked very hard. She was a very good police officer, but this was within the first year of her time on the job. And I think that the impact that dealing with him had was far different than the impact that dealing with him had with us. And I know Dr. Tom talked about some of the impacts that the job has on us. And it wasn't until quite recently that I realized the different impact it had on us and it had on Trish. I retired just a little over a year ago, and I received messages from former colleagues, often mentioning specific calls that we had taken together, and realizing through their messages that the impact that call had on them was far different than it had on me. And I'm sure the impacts that certain calls had on me would be far different than it would have had on other officers. So it's very difficult to tell, I think, sometimes the impact any specific call has on any specific officers.
Right. Well, thanks, Mark. And did you have something to say, Trish? I'm sorry I cut you off.
I'm sorry, I misheard. I was saying it was I'm not familiar with a call, but it was the correct call.
Okay, good. All right. Jackie Gordon is here as well. I think that's
by the way, Lorene, can I just interject?
Yeah.
In the book, it said something about Mark Denis coming to my rescue regarding car repairs. I want to make this very official. It was the other way around. I came to his rescue for car repairs. I'll send you a manual.
Speaking of not
You know,
remembering,
Trish has some really hilarious stories. Like she's got this horrible call that she was on, but she also pays tribute to guys who were in the D platoon, right? Have I got it right? The D platoon? And you know, there's the guy that had the smelliest fart, for example. You know, so there are moments of humor in the books, these moments of humor by Trish and also by Ron Pond, who is in Yukon. He's not with us here tonight, but he has some very funny stories to tell about, mostly about snow and igloos. And Jackie Gordon is here tonight. Jackie, do you want to unmute yourself for a minute and say hello? She wrote a story as well.
Hello, everybody.
There's Jackie. Hi, Jackie. So good of you to be here. Jackie is pretty amazing. Jackie, I'm going to read a little bit of her biography. She's the Sergeant at Arms, the Executive Director of Precinct Properties, and the Legislative Protective Service for the Legislative Assembly of Ontario. And her story is one of community, and it has a lot of heart. Jackie, do you want to just mention your story briefly?
Yeah, I can tell you when I first offered to write, I didn't really see where I fit in the whole theme, but Debbie convinced me to put it to paper, and I think I told the story from both the community perspective as well as from a woman's perspective in a male-dominated profession, and I think my story is more one of resiliency and taking the values that I took away from policing and use them to move through some of the challenging periods in my policing career, and went on to be the first female Sergeant at Arms in the province of Ontario and the first full-time female Sergeant at Arms in Canada. So I think it's one of, encouragement for people that run up against the wall and look for possible solutions to it. And I think I explained from my perspective how I moved past it.
Isn't that great? Well, I know for Ontario people, it's getting pretty late, but I'd like to show you, this is a picture of Jackie in uniform. Isn't that lovely with the set? Do you call that a scepter?
We call it a mace.
A mace.
Yeah.
A mace and that same sort of bib, it's probably not called a bib, but we see the barristers wearing, and such an interesting hat. So that's your daily uniform, is it?
Yes, that's my uniform. That's what I wear every day. Yes.
Oh, well, great. There's a question that's come in from Hilda Chasia-Smith. Hilda Chasia-Smith is one of our cherished authors. She wrote this lovely book, which is called Chasia's Enchantment. I keep it very near because the poetry is so beautiful. And Hilda Smith has asked, I hope that I can make sense of this question. Is there enough internal support for the police force going through these experiences? Is that your question, Hilda? Yeah, okay, Debbie? Debbie Doyle, does that make sense?
Yes, yes and no. So is there enough support for the police officers, or is there enough support for the police forces specifically as an organization?
I'm asking it's both. It's both. As a meditation and yoga master myself and a healer and former teacher, everything that I've heard tonight, I can't wait to tell so many people, professionals and family people, to get a copy of this book, and I will be getting it as well. But I lived next door to a policeman when I was a preteen. And I remember how wonderful it was to have this wonderful couple next door who were loving and kind. And when I would see Jeff Burton was his name in Winnipeg, Manitoba, go off to work, I'm a child. Well, not a child today. I'm going to be 71 on Sunday. But as a child, that awe that I grew up with for the police and the police force, and growing up in lovely Winnipeg in the winter with the big buffalo coats, but knowing that everywhere I would go, that if I needed help or I saw someone who might need something, that you could call or you could go up to them. I saw 8 officers at a local coffee shop not long ago, actually at a Red's in downtown, on 58th in Calgary. And I remember when I walked in, I wanted to go up and say thank you. They were quiet and they were eating their breakfast, ready to go somewhere. And I didn't. I thought it, and I was meeting someone else. But yes, I often think of that when I see within my own city different connotations that come out about the police, different attitudes. And I am awestruck with pain, knowing that our wonderful people have their own issues, our wonderful officers and undercover and what goes on behind the scenes that I may not know. Sure, there are things that aren't wonderful and things that need to be addressed. I remember a young officer stopping me and being quite curt when I was on the road. And I remember thinking to myself, my cell phone was down on my dashboard. And I looked down and I went and I picked it up just as I was pulling over to the side. And I stopped the car and he lambasted me for holding the phone. And I wasn't even as conscious that while I was pulling over to the side, I was holding the phone. I wasn't on it. But I was thinking how much was going on in his day. I felt that he wasn't, that he was being a little rough. But inside, even as I said, you know, just a minute. Inside, how do we teach others to be respectful, to know that what the force may need from the internal support includes the internal of us, the civilian. So yes,
Well,
a long way to say,
sort of,
what does a police force have and what do they need? And I offer, if I could, to volunteer some of my own services.
Right. So I can answer part of that. I know years ago, the police force had absolutely nothing. So when I started, my parents and my husband are here, and I don't know if I told my parents this story, and if I haven't, this is going to be the first time they heard it. So it was February of 1991, and I was going to be married in July. And in February, I was stabbed with a dirty needle from a junkie. And back then, everybody thought, well, it was the day of the AIDS crisis. And unfortunately, at that time, there were no supports. So I was told by, once again, a white shirt supervisor, don't worry about it, go home, get drunk, you'll be fine in the morning. That was the support. Since then, things have changed. Since then, society has said, you know what, if an officer has been stabbed with a dirty needle, if there's contamination with blood or anything like that, a warrant can be obtained so the officer can go on the cocktail or anything else in case there's a disease that can be transferred. That support was by society, society allowing it and it being pushed forth through the courts. I think the part of respect goes both ways. Are there issues within police services? Absolutely. And in the book, it shows there is misogyny, there is racism, there's unacceptable behavior. But also there's humanity. And the majority, remember, news, something bad always makes the news, something good never does. And it doesn't matter what field, priests, Catholic Church, police officers, judges, lawyers, dentists, psychologists, if any profession, if one person in any profession does something wrong, the whole profession is bad. And that's not the case. Mm-hmm. And depending on the police service will depend on what supports there are. And slowly it's coming about. Are there enough? Absolutely not. But it's all about finances. It's all about time and money. And police services have always been doing more with less. And I think that, as Dr. Dalby had said, the defunding the police is ridiculous, but I think it's good to bring it in the forefront because there are things that the police do that no other service is going to do. So the police says, well, you know what, we'll do it. If nobody else is going to do it, we'll do it. And that was obvious during COVID when ambulances couldn't take people to the hospital, the police would. Even though that wasn't their job, the police would do it, because all of us here who are retired and serving, we all wanted to and still want to help.
Well, here's an excellent final question that ties in with that, and I think is going to be a beautiful way to say goodnight to everybody. Linda Rumpel asks, what would you tell current police officers in the force, knowing what you now know after retirement, Debbie?
How about I let someone else answer this, because I've been talking so much?
Well, shall I choose somebody, or does somebody want to volunteer? I just know Gwyn wants to answer this question. I see it on her face.
Absolutely.
I'll step up for that one too as well.
Okay. So Gwyn?
I'm just,
Oh,
Gwyn?
Gwyn and then Ernie.
I think, well, it's interesting because, you know, there's points in all of our careers, I'm sure we thought, I'm never going to recommend that anybody do this as a living. But now I really encourage, and you know, I'm in Calgary and I'm working for Satina Nation Police Service now, proudly, on the civilian side. But I'm always happy when people join the Calgary Police Service because I need them to pay into the pension fund. So I won't go serious on you here.
Okay.
I just those are my final comment.
All right, so pay into the pension fund. Okay, fine. Now, Ernie, you had some advice.
Absolutely. And when I talk to young police officers, I tell them that when you get out of training, nobody cares or nobody knows how much experience you have, right? They expect you to be a leader. You could be 5 days at the police college and you could be at a shooting, or it could be at a tragic accident. And people just look at you because they want leadership. And the other part I tell them, and which is really important to me, is everybody already knows you're a policeman, you're a police officer, you're wearing a uniform, you came in a car, you're arriving to their call. But if you want to be a good cop, let people know who you are. And they already know that you're a police officer. Let them know who you are. It's reciprocity. If they know who you are, it's a lot less likely that you'll be assaulted by them, and when you're in violent or any situation, if they know who you are, if they know your name, the chances are your encounter will go a lot better than if you go like with your shoulders hunched up and ready to be in a confrontation. It's just human nature. Cops are people, and if they know your people and they know your name, your career will be a lot better than a lot of officers that think that they're TV stars or whatever the case is. But yeah, just be yourself and let them know who you are. And once that connection is there, the reciprocity will come back, and you'll deal with strangers, unfortunately, but for the most part, you work in the same area for years and years. So you're part of the community, and the community is part of you. So that's my advice to young people.
Well, thanks, Ernie. That's an excellent final word. But you know what, everybody, I sure enjoyed this, and I was really flattered to see almost everybody stuck around the whole time. We're doing this again next week with the Edmonton people, and so if you feel like more, if you feel like, you know, if you've warmed up to our personalities and you'd love to spend next Wednesday with us as well, Audrey's in Edmonton is hosting an event that's at the same time, same place next Wednesday. So if you're interested, just pop on over to Durvile.com and you can hear some other people speak about policing. So June, if you're here, you could just wrap it up, I guess.
Yeah, for sure.